wireless networking. In this nugget, we talk about wireless security, or as some would say, wireless insecurity, because it's not that secure, especially if you're using default settings on an 802.11b wireless network. And that's one of the security problems. We'll have 802.11a, b, and G, G probably being the best of all of them. But B, there's a lot of those B wireless access points out there with a myriad of problems, especially with wired equivalency protocol. Well, you can secure a wireless access point. I talked to you about some ways of being able to do that, and then I show you hackers tools that can crack that all apart. No, actually, there are some secure ways of securing a wireless access point and some secure authentication mechanisms that you can use as well, and I'll conclude with a discussion of those. All right, now as we get started here, one of the first things I just want to point out, and I don't want to exhaust this, is a wireless standards comparison. This is an important certified ethical hacker objective. Now I've seen a lot of people come up with these elaborate charts with very specific details and lots of technical data about each one of these wireless standards. Let me just make it simple for you. Just know this information. This is kind of pretty much what a certified ethical hacker would need to know. Know what frequency something occurs on, for example. 802.11a uses the 5 gigahertz frequency. 802.11b uses the 2.4 gigahertz frequency, as does 802.11g. And it's kind of funny about that because if you have wireless networks in the 802.11g range, and you also have those cordless handheld phones, you might run into a problem with that because a lot of those cordless phones operate on 2.4 gigahertz as well. And in fact, my wife, a while back, she was telling me, you know, whenever I'm on the phone, all my calls seem to get dropped. They just drop for no reason whatsoever. I was like, oh, yeah, sure, whatever, you know. And I never talk on the phone anyway, so it didn't matter that much to me. But she kept complaining about it, and so finally I decided, okay, I'm sure that's true, I'll listen to you. After a little investigating, I realized, well, I'm using G networks, and I got 2.4 gigahertz phones as well as wireless access points. And it turned out that as soon as my wife would walk to a part of the house where our wireless access point signal was the strongest, she'd get kicked off the phone. So all I had to do was go out and buy $100 worth of new phones in the 5.8 gigahertz range, and now everything works fine. But that is still an issue because hackers can use that kind of a thing to really wreak havoc with the network by interfering with these signals or setting up rogue access points and that kind of thing. Well, also there's the data rate. How fast do they go? 54 megabits per second, 11, and 54. Probably for the future, the prevailing rate that we're going to be seeing is this 54 megabit per second 802.11g, although some network technologies, which are vendor specific usually, have the ability to compress the data and double the effective throughput of that. At least that's what it says on the box. I doubt if you'll ever get, you know, close to 108 megabits per second though. But 802.11b still in an awful lot of small businesses and homes. Don't see it in too many large corporations, but they are out there. The range, 225 feet. You know, most of these go pretty far. We'll see in a little while here how you can go really far with the right equipment. All right, let's get right to it. Let's take a look, first of all, at some of the 802.11 security problems that we have. And I just kind of combined all of our wireless technologies, which are going to include 802.11a, b, and g. And there's other kind of subsets and so forth, but that's the only ones we're really concerned about in any degree. And really, it's mostly b and g. One of the first things you'll see here with security problems is something called disassociation. This can be a legitimate networking problem that's misconfigured, or it can also be a malicious network attempt for a man-in-the-middle attack. Let me show you how that works. So I've got a wireless access point here, and I've got a wireless access point here. In proper configuration, you should have these either for the same company, for example, and you want users to be able to associate with this access point, and then they're walking to the conference room and they get closer to this one. You want them to transparently associate with this one instead, because it's closer, it gives them a better signal, right? Well, what you want to do, and this is the ideal way to configure wireless access points which operate on channels 1 through 11 in the United States and 1 through 13 in Europe, and then in other countries they go up into the 20s somewhere, but we'll consider mostly just the 11 channels. Well, ideally what you want to do is to set this one up 5 channels away from this one. So if this one's on channel 1, then you'd want to set this one up on channel 6. And then if you had another one somewhere else in the network, you'd set that one up on channel 11. The reason why is each one of these are actually just a few decimals away, point decimals, away from the frequency range. So channel 1 might be, 2.437 gigahertz, and channel 6 might be 2.482 gigahertz, or something like that. So they're just far enough away in terms of the bandwidth, or rather in terms of the gigahertz range, so that they don't crosstalk one another and interfere with one another's signals. Now, here's the problem with this. What if we misconfigured a wireless access point because people kept complaining, hey, on the way to the conference room, I keep losing signal? Well, maybe we put another one in here on channel 2. Well, that's too close to channel 1 for sure, and we're going to get crosstalk. And what's going to happen is people are going to constantly get that thing down the future tray that says, that it's detected a wireless network, and it's going to say, new wireless network detected. Do you want to connect? Yes or no? That kind of thing. Well, that's going to lend itself to a lot of user confusion. Whereas if you have these far enough away in terms of the channels that are being used, it should just go transparently from one to the next. Also, if you're in the unenviable place where you happen to be in that little cubicle that's right between this access point and this access point, all day long you're going to switch access points and you're going to have network problems, you're not going to have complete file transfers, and it's going to really just wreak havoc with whoever happens to sit in that cubicle. Well, that's misconfigured in terms of administration, but a hacker could also do this. And these wireless access points are small nowadays. I mean, my wallet is about the same size as some of these wireless access points. If I'm a malicious user and I'm mad at my company, I can just sit that wireless access point up on a conflicting channel, or even on the same channel, and I can attempt to hijack sessions, or I can just kick people off because of dissociation. So this is a real problem, and it's not really just a hacker problem. It's really a misconfiguration problem that a lot of administrators misunderstand. Also, one thing you should do with your access points if you want a good configuration, I'll remove the bad one just to make this clear. For a good configuration, these should both have the same name. So if the name of the wireless access point, the SSID, is corp, then I should configure that on both of these wireless access points to make the transparent difference between the two of those, so that when users go from one to the next, they don't really see any disruption. A big part of this as well that's a problem is there's no user-based access. And again, this is all kind of out-of-the-box settings for wireless access points. There's ways of fixing a lot of this. But out of the box, this is a problem because you can't just say, I only want my wireless access point to be used by people in my company, or by Bill and Joe and Jim, and anybody else will be denied access to this wireless access point. In fact, let me go ahead and give you an example of this, how this works. This is a diagram that I've used in a lot of different things that I've taught, but it's really interesting. This is from the University of Kansas, and they did a ward driving study on their own campus. Ward driving is where you simply go around with a laptop or a wireless access point detector, and you try to find wireless access points and try to see how far out they will reach in their signal. Well, you can see here that they have wireless access points identified by these various asterisks, and each one is identified in these lines. For example, this red one, you can go clear out along this red line, clear out here into the parking lot, where some hacker is sitting out in his car over here, and be able to get signals from this red wireless access point. So you could intercept traffic, you could attempt to decrypt keys, and all this kind of stuff, and without anybody being any the wiser. And it's made hacking a lot easier for wireless, because instead of having to sneak your way into the lobby and social engineer your way into a cubicle and plugging into somebody's Ethernet drop, well, and being potentially caught, now you're just sitting outside in your car, in your little Yugo, and you're sitting out there capturing packets out of the air. Nothing wrong with sitting in a parking lot, right? So what's the big deal? So in any case, you get an idea for how far out this goes. I don't really have a scale for this, but you can kind of use the cars that are out in the parking lot as an idea for scale there. And it goes way out, and I don't even have the whole picture in here. It goes even further out here than what we see. So you can see you go clear out to this road and still get signal. In fact, I just remembered this. I went to DEF CON last year, and this is a hackers conference that usually goes on in the summer in Las Vegas. Yes, I went strictly for educational purposes. Anyway, I went to DEF CON, and every year they have a Wi-Fi shootout where they try to see how far away you can go with your signals before your signal drops off. And they're looking for full signals at least 11 megabits per second. Let me see if I think they still have this website for this. So let me check it out. I think it's at www.wi-fi-shootout.com. See if it's still out. There it is. Okay, This year, they broke all previous records. Look how far they went. 125 miles. So you can go quite far with these things. And I actually, met a couple of these guys. They probably don't remember me. I just kind of chatted a little bit with them. And I saw them when they came back with this trailer and this truck. And on this truck, they had this big old parabolic-looking satellite antenna. That's how they were able to send and transmit these signals from 125 miles away. And in the past, the only thing that's really stopped them is some kind of obstruction, because what they have to do with this is they focus it into a beam so that it's not a scattered range, that it's a very, very narrow focus. And usually they just wind up getting in the way of hills, get in the way, or buildings, or something like that. And that's the advantage of being out in Las Vegas is there's so much flat desert that they can get pretty far there. And then here's some other, information about this whole thing. It was a pretty cool little contest that they had. And each year they try to see who's able to get out there the furthest. So in practical implementations, how does this far-reaching wireless access points that can even if they only go a few hundred feet, how does that affect us? Well, I'll give you a good example. A few weeks ago here, I went around my block. This is my neighborhood. I went around the block, or if you want to call it a block, it really looks, I don't know, more like an amoeba. So I went around the amoeba, and I decided to take my laptop with me, and I just used a consumer off-the-shelf version of a wireless access card, network card. It's just a Linksys. And I wanted to see how many signals I could get as I go around the block. Well, I, of course, picked up my own outside of my house, and then I went down the corner here, and I didn't get much down here, but by the time I got around to here somewhere, I was picking up several different wireless access points, and they weren't very smartly named either. Let me show you what I found. I just took a screenshot of what I was able to find, and of course I erased out the people's names here, because a lot of people will just name it according to their last name. Like if I wasn't being smart, I'd name mine Conrad Wireless or something like that. Well, I don't think I want people to know exactly who that belongs to. I go to a lot of small companies, and when I'm more driving, and they'll also have the name of their company. I went to a financial services location one time. Actually, I was just away on vacation, and my laptop just happened to pick up a broadcast signal from a wireless access point, and it was a major financial company that was broadcasting their signal, letting me know that I could be free to hack into it anytime I wanted to. Not that I did. So anyway, you get the idea here. And only one of these had any kind of security on it. And you can see this is a Windows XP settings here, where you can see what kind of wireless access points you're connecting to. And even though the signal was weak, remember I was just using the one that was by default with my Linksys network card. I could have goosed that and increased the strength of that in a number of different ways. So only one of these was security enabled. That probably meant that they had WEP turned on, wireless and wired equivalency protocol, or they had some other method chosen there. I didn't really explore it much more than that. Any of these others I could have easily connected to and just become a freeloader. I could have gotten free internet access, so that instead of paying $50 a month for my internet access, which by the way is actually worth it because I get almost 10 megabits per second on my cable modem. Oh, I know you're jealous of me. Anyway, I could connect to one of these guys for free. It wouldn't be very fast, but if I would improve my antenna, it would at least be free. As I was thinking about the weak signal that I was able to use with my Linksys card, I wanted to point out that if you really want some signal strength that's got easy portability, you can get this Cantenna. And this thing, you can buy it for $50, and it gives you an extremely focused signal that you can point towards, corporate buildings or neighborhoods or whatever it is that you want to connect to. And by the way, if you order online, you get to talk to this really nice-looking girl here. So in any case, just go ahead and order one of these things, and you can really get yourself some good range out of this. Anyway, I don't know how far it reaches, but it does definitely give you better signal. Also, another thing to think about with this sort of stuff, by the way, is that you do eavesdrop, or if you do ward drive, think carefully about legal implications if you get caught. So be very careful about this kind of thing, because there may be FCC issues if you rig up an antenna of your own with your own kind of configuration. Well, that could fall awry of certain FCC regulations. Another problem with wireless access points is you don't have any centralized authentication, accountability, or authorization. So there's no central way to keep track of who's accessing what and whether or not you're a legitimate user, and a way to collect all of that information and put it all in logs and that kind of a thing. And again, all of this stuff that I'm talking to you about is just out-of-the-box configurations. There are ways to fix this, but our main point is how to break stuff, not how to fix it here, right? Also, there's RC4 attacks. Remember, RC4 is an encryption algorithm, which, and honestly, on its own, it's not that bad. Some people have, criticized it for different things. And you have to actually be a high-level mathematician in a lot of respects to be able to analyze it. But overall, really, RC4 is not that bad. It's just if you implement it wrong. In the case of wireless access points, particularly 802.11b access points, okay, 802.11, that's supposed to be a dot .b wireless access points that use wired equivalency protocol, well, you can use a 40-bit or 128-bit initialization vector with these, and it combines the initialization vector with an RC4 encryption and a specific password that you specify to be able to encrypt the payload. But there's still information besides the payload that can be derived out of this traffic. And that's why a lot of guys like to war drive and pick out packets, because if they pick out enough of these packets, they're able to reconstruct enough information so that they can decrypt the data. And we'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later on. But that's the real issue, is where people think they're secure using 802.11b, but they're using WEP, which is really not very good security at all. Also, there's an issue of extended authentication. And this is simply where we extend the authentication outside of the access point, so that the access point itself is not really performing the authentication. A central location of some kind is instead. Could be something like a radius server, or some kind of a certificate solution, or PEAP, which is Password Extensible Authentication Protocol, which is something that Microsoft favors. So there's other ways of doing that, but again, out of the box, you don't get that. Also, there's an issue of key management. What if we do suspect that somebody's used a hacker's tool to crack our WEP key, and we just haven't upgraded to 802.11g or any more secure solutions? If we suspect that someone's cracked that and they're freeloading off of our network or eavesdropping, I got to go change the keys on all my access points now. Well, how many access points do I have? You know, you might have to go through a lot of different access points in a larger organization, and it'd be much simpler to just change the key in one location, or to use a centralized authentication mechanism so that you don't have to go to all your access points and make those changes. Now then, before we go about the business of breaking apart a wireless access point and all the security that people think they have, let's first of all talk about how you would want to secure it if you can. And these would even be good tips for in your own home. First thing you'll want to do is to turn off the SSID. That's the service set identifier, and that identifies the name of the wireless access point, so to speak. And it's that gives humans the ability to see a wireless access point. It identifies itself, and usually you get some kind of little word balloon down in the tray area down in your Windows XP system that will say wireless networks found, and it will identify which ones it's found, and you can then choose to connect or not. And in fact, I'm going to go here and show you a lot of this stuff. Here I've just got a Linksys router, and the only thing I've changed on this one is I've changed its IP address and its range so that I can communicate with it and show these demonstrations to you. This is an out-of-the-box Linksys router, and it's a wireless G broadband router. So this is going to give us capability of being more secure than just a plain old B, 802.11b network. In any case, if we go to the wireless settings here, then what we'll see is that we have the ability to change the SSID. And actually, I just decided to, offline here, I just decided to change it back so you can see what the default IP address is with the Linksys devices. Now, the 10 dot address I had earlier, as well as the 192.168.1 address range, are all private IP address ranges, so they're not useful on the internet. And that's why we're using this as a router, because it'll route from our private internet on this family of addresses out to the public on public internet addresses. Now, let's get to the business of wireless here. So you just click on wireless, and with this one, what's the wireless network mode? Well, it says mixed. I could disable wireless altogether if I'm using this only as a router, or I could use B only, a bad idea because of the security vulnerabilities there, or G only. Now with G only, I'm going to improve my security outlook here, but you have to have some other infrastructure in order to make that work the best. Since we're talking primarily about weaknesses with B, I'll just leave it on B for now, but this is another big weakness where the wireless network name is Linksys. So as I was driving around my neighborhood, several of the other devices that I saw out there, a couple of them anyway, were just named Linksys, and I could identify them easily that way. Now, the only reason why I would leave this Linksys is if it was actually some other kind of a wireless access point, like a 3Com, and then, or a Cisco, Aeronet or something. And then that way, you know, I might, for a brief period of time anyway, trick people into thinking that it's something else, and that way they might try to launch the incorrect exploits against it. Here's where the channels are, and I told you earlier, they're all incrementally different within the gigahertz. That's why we don't want 1 and 2 the same, or on two different neighboring wireless access points, because they're too close and they can get crosstalk. So you usually want 5 channels of separation, and that's just a practical administrative tip for you on that one. Then whether you have the SSID broadcast or not. I disable this because it makes it not easy for people to pick out. For example, if I disable it and someone war drives around my block, or my amoeba, as I mentioned earlier, then it's not going to be obvious. There's still ways of detecting it. When an initial association is made with the wireless access point, even if this is disabled, the SSID still goes out initially. So someone who's got the tools to do the packet capture will potentially be able to still figure out the name of the SSID. Another weakness with the Linksys, by the way, if you can identify the SSID and you're trying to do some war driving, is that it just uses the default admin password as well. The default password is just admin. You don't even need a username, in fact. If you enter one in, it doesn't matter. You can just enter in whatever username you want or leave it blank. As long as you enter in a password of admin, you're in. Of course, you can change that, and of course, you should. Now, by the way, I'm doing this with Linksys because they're common and they're pretty much just ubiquitous, but you might have some other brand. You might have a 3Com, you might have a D-Link, whatever it is. They're all similar in the kinds of settings you can configure. Your settings will look different, but they're all similar. The security mode is disabled by default, which again, pretty much just opens it up to whoever wants to gain access. But the big thing here is WEP. This is probably still the largest distribution of access points is going to be 802.11b access points using WEP. Notice that I can use 64 bits or 128 bits. It's not really 64 bits or 128 bits. You might have heard other people say, I thought it was only 40 bits. That's because 24 bits are used for other information in this. Same thing is true with this one. 24 bits here are also used for other information. It's not really quite that long, mathematically speaking, but what you'll do then is you'll enter in a passphrase here, my secret word or whatever, and you generate it based upon the RC4 algorithm, and it generates certain keys that you can use in this. And then anybody with any one of these 4 keys will be able to connect to this wireless access point. Now, the better methods, and we're not addressing these in total right now, but would be something like using a radius server. With the radius server, I enter in the IP address of my radius server. The default radius port is port 1812, and then we have a shared key to transmit here as well. But the advantage is here it authenticates my authenticates my wireless access point, and then once my wireless access point has been authenticated, I can pass through user authentication to be able to access that wireless access point. So it's a much more secure method. This would mean that I would be able to limit my wireless access point only to Bill and Joe and Bob and Sue and or people within my company and not just passerby. Another thing you can do, and this is something that I favor, is the Wi-Fi protected access pre-shared key using TKIP, and you can also use AES, which is a very advanced encryption standard. But TKIP is Temporal Key Integrity Protocol, and you just enter in the shared key here. But even though here we're using a shared key that we configure on our wireless access point, the advantage is this key generates fresh I think it's every 10,000, or rather every 100 kilobytes. So it starts off using the same shared key, but then it generates new all the time, and it's very difficult for a hacker to track down that way. Also, Wi-Fi protected access using a radius. You can also use a radius in this whole sequence as well for added security. Of course, that would require that you also have a radius server. This would be more of a corporate solution, in which case they probably wouldn't be using a Linksys anyway. They'd be using the actual Cisco AeroNet wireless access points in all probability. Now, some people decide, hey, I'll just use a wireless MAC filter, and I'll enable this, and you can only get access to my network if you happen to have one of the MAC addresses that I enter in here, and you just have to manually enter them in. And if you've ever had to enter in MAC addresses, you know how fraught with typos that can be, and what a hassle it is. So anyway, you enter in all 20 people, or however many that you want to use here, and then you save the settings, and then only people that have a MAC address that matches this list will be able to gain access to it. Now, do you remember a tool I showed you a while back where you can fake the MAC address you have? It's called SMAC, S-M-A-C. Google for it and you'll find it. Well, all I have to do is to sniff network traffic, find one of the MAC addresses that has access, and change my MAC address to that, and then I'm in. Now, another thing I recommend over on the administration page is, of course, you change the password, not from admin. You don't want to use admin. You change it to something else that you know. And then I also recommend that you use HTTPS. There's actually a certificate inside of this access point that will allow you to use HTTPS sessions so that you don't have eavesdropping going on. And, of course, that's recommended for obvious purposes. So, go ahead and enable that. And then if you want to, and this is just something that's a matter of convenience, but you got to be careful about this, you can enable remote management. And I'm going to click OK. That's just telling me not to use the default password there. But I could click enable this after I've changed the default password, and then I could put in a management port of my own choosing, again using HTTPS if I want to. And then from across the internet, I could open up a browser, put in my public-facing IP address here, and then it would allow me to make a connection through the port that I specify right there. So again, ways of being able to make a connection securely, or at least reasonably securely. And then continuing on my list here, as I mentioned earlier, if you do have to use WEP, at least make it 128-bit. That way you're not, low-hanging fruit and easier to crack. You might take, days or weeks for people to crack this. Although there are some inherent weaknesses in WEP that I mentioned earlier that have been further exploited that might make that even that a little bit faster. But we talked about SNMP in an earlier nugget. Remember, the default password for SNMP, or default community name, is public and then private for read-write access to the SNMP. Make sure you change those community names on your device if it gives you that capability. Use HTTPS, as I just pointed out in our demonstration a moment ago, where I showed you the browser with my router showing that to you. And then secure your clients. And by that I mean the software clients. Let's say you've got some laptops out there with wireless access points on, wireless access cards in them. Well, a lot of times those cards will have a vendor-specific utility that turns on the card and loads its driver, and it has an interface of some kind where it can enter in information about that card so that you can specify which access point it connects to and so forth. Well, just be careful about those clients because some of them are not secure. And they may cache the passwords and so forth in a file on the local hard drive that's something like Kane, or that Kane enable utility that we've looked at in the past. Something like that has got a very good password cracker, and it's able to crack local passwords. So, be careful of that kind of thing. Then there's also MAC filtering. We talked about that. You can make sure that only people with certain MAC address access your device, but that's easy to trick once again, and so don't depend solely on that. And then be careful of, again, those rogue wireless access points, and I'll show you how that can really throw something in the works. So if you'll forgive my crude drawing here, this is an example of how it is. So let's say that this is the internet out here. This is a firewall that I've got protecting my corporate network right here. And I've got servers and workstations and so forth throughout this thing. I know these look like little Lego pieces, but actually that's supposed to be a desktop PC, and this is a server. But anyway, I'm secure. I'm behind my firewall. We really have a good IT department. They keep an eye on things. They keep all of us all patched up with the latest protections for viruses and all that kind of thing. However, over here in this group, we got a series of engineers here that are pretty technically adept. And they say, we have to go back and forth between each other's offices in the conference room, and we always have to unplug the drop cable and then go back into the conference room and plug the patch cable back in and back and forth, and always having to unplug their laptops, so they get tired of that. And they say, hey, let's just go ahead and install our own wireless access point here. And we'll plug it into a cable that connects to this network so that we can still have access to our server here, our file server, where we can get our schematics and drawings and all that kind of stuff. Well, that's very convenient for these guys. But if they just leave it with the default settings, my little hacker sitting out here in their Yugo out in the parking lot, they can now pick up signals from this wireless access point and be able to eavesdrop on that network. And this, in turn, then, totally circumvents our firewall solution and everything else, and we now have directed access to that network as if we were physically connected to an Ethernet drop somewhere in the building. Now, another thing I found that might be effective against blocking people that are eavesdropping from a distance away into your wireless network, even for home use, is if you go to this force field wireless. I haven't actually tried this, but it looks kind of interesting. Defend Air Radio Shield Paint Additive. You add this to your paint. It includes medical particles in it that will block radio signals. So, therefore, if you paint your walls with this, apparently it's supposed to block your wireless signals from escaping, and you, of course, have to coat the windows as well with their radio window shield to protect wireless network signals from escaping from your building. Other things you could do would be to just point your signals, point your antennas inside in towards the interior of your building and centrally locate your access points. But I have found that this stuff works really great also for blocking interstellar signals from space so that aliens can't read your mind and plant thoughts in your head and things like that. Now then finally, I'm going to talk to you about some of the hackers' tools that can be used to circumvent the security, and especially, again, for 802.11b using wired equivalency protocol. Of course, you can use an 802.11g wireless access point and still use WEP It's just that why would you? I mean, it would be kind of dumb. But there's a lot of dumb people out there, so it's still a possibility. Anyway, one of the things you would use would be NetStumbler. The advantage for using NetStumbler, because there are a lot of products that will do what this does, but this one is kind of a ward driving tool. You load your laptop up with NetStumbler, and it has a Windows version. You can go around, and it will allow you to identify any wireless access points that it sees. It's pretty good about identifying them and interpreting the results. Another thing I like about it is it also interoperates with GPS so that you can even locate it specifically on a GPS map, and it'll identify the exact coordinates. A lot of hackers use this kind of thing with the GPS coordinates to exchange data. Another program that also works with GPS if you want is something called Kismet. This is a Linux tool, or a Unix Linux tool. The thing with this one is that it not only allows you to do ward driving with it and with GPS, but it also is a packet capture utility. So it's a tool like this that could be useful for capturing packets so that you can then later attempt to decrypt them. And then this Prism 2 dump is also just another sniffer that you can use for wireless networks. Ethereal also, again, obviously another sniffer. This is still, my preferred sniffer because once I've got the appropriate drivers configured, I can use my wireless network card to sniff using any one of these utilities. But if I've already got Windows loaded, WinPCAP, and Ethereal, then that's an easy way to go. Now, another Linux utility is AirSnort. This is the one that's really gotten the notoriety. This is one of the premier packages, or at least the first package that was made, that allows you to decrypt or crack apart the WEP keys. Now, depending upon how it's used and how many packets need to be exchanged, typically it can take millions of packets to be exchanged before you gather enough data to start cracking apart the wired equivalency protocol packets in the password. So you do have to be a little bit patient sometimes. You might need to camp out outside of a building for a while, just doing nothing but capturing packets. It could take a little while. And of course, it's going to be easier if it's using a word list and a dictionary attack of some time to crack that apart. If it's going to be a lot harder, however, if you have to brute force it, and that can take weeks to crack that apart using brute force. However, there is another tool that's recently come out called AirCrack, and I'll just add this on to the end here, AirCrack. And this one has come up with some kind of a new algorithm or something like that that's able to use only about 500,000 bits of data, packets of data, to be able to crack apart the 128-bit keys. Now, in the past, for something like AirSnort and other utilities to be able to crack apart the WEP key, it can take millions of packets. Now we're down to maybe around 500,000 to be able to crack apart the key. Let me close out with also discussing a little bit more about authentication. Now here, I'm really talking more about how to secure your wireless networks rather than how to break them apart, because that's really kind of trivial anymore, at least if WEP is in use. So that's not really too big of an issue. However, most of us have wireless access points in our home or in our office, and you do probably want to know how to secure those a little bit better. So Wi-Fi protected access using TKIP or Advanced Encryption Standard. Strongly recommend that method. Very difficult to crack on a rudimentary basis, at least. There's also Leap. Now, this is going to be a little bit more of a corporate solution. You'll find this on Cisco wireless access points. This is just their implementation of 802.1x, which I'll address shortly here. It's pretty strong with the exception of one single utility that's written by a guy named, I think it's Brian Bartow that wrote this. But this ANWRAP utility, ANWRAP, is going to be a dictionary attack tool that you can use against Leap-enabled Cisco wireless devices. And unless this password's been very good on that wireless access point, it is possible to crack it using this tool, so be careful of that. Make sure you just have a good password is all. Also with PEEP, this is something called Password Extensible Authentication Protocol. This allows you to get onto a wireless network based upon your Windows credentials, and I'm mostly thinking of a Microsoft solution with this in Active Directory. Using PEEP, you get your credentials. Once you've logged on, it also downloads a certificate to your computer, which you can then use, and you can kind of leapfrog from PEEP down to an even better solution, which is 802.1x. PEEP uses MS Chat version 2 to perform its transaction and then ultimately to get the certificate after the authentication has taken place. And then 802.1x is a step even better. This is going to require certificates for the specific computers to be able to communicate on the network. That will help to prevent just an eavesdropper, because if an eavesdropper doesn't have one of your certificates, then they won't be able to gain access. Let me point out also that people often mistake this for a wireless protocol of some kind because we got 802.11a and b and g. Well, first of all, it's easy for your eyes to play tricks on you here. It's not 802.11x, it's 802.1x. And I even have a lot of hackers that get this mixed up. This is not a wireless issue. In fact, if you go here to your local area connections on your wired network card and go to its properties and choose authentication, you see that you can enable 802.1x authentication for this network, and then you have to have a smart card or some kind of a certificate or PEEP in order to be able to, or MD5 challenge, you have to have one of those security methods in order to be able to communicate on the network. And the details of all of this are well beyond certified ethical hacker, but I want you to be aware of that so that you're not out of context for security solutions using one. Now then, to conclude, as a free bonus, so to speak, I thought I'd take you to this website. This is just an FYI. A lot of times, I can't get creative enough or complicated enough to think of some strange, difficult-to-guess password and all that kind of stuff. So what I do is I go to this website, winguides.com, security password, and you see the URL up there. Just tell it how long you want your password to be, and then what kind of characteristics you want that password to have. You know, numbers, letters, punctuation, what do you want? And then you just click on Generate Password. Now, one thing you might think about here is, wait a minute, if I generate a password, then it's going to give me, some password. Okay, great, there's a good password, but that was just passed in the clear. Couldn't I secure that somehow? Sure. You can go to their SSL secured version of the password generator. And at this point, now I'm on a secure website, notice HTTPS, and I'll be able to do a secure generation for this. So I'll go ahead and enter in my password again here, or whatever I want, what characteristics I want it to have. And now I've got a password that's been generated for me. And it's, it's given out in phonetics like this so that you can easily identify it. Charlie Hotel for Papa Hash November. I feel like I'm an Army Ranger or something like that. But anyway, you just take your password then and you just, copy it out here. And you can put it into wherever you want to place it for your security. And of course, I'd actually use more characters than that, but it's easy enough to generate with this security guide for Windows. In this nugget, we discussed wireless access points and wireless insecurity, so to speak. And we started off with a discussion of the various 802.11 versions, A, B, and G, and some little statistical information about them, as well as security problems inherent particularly with 802.11b and the wired equivalency protocol, which can be easily cracked given enough time. We also talked about securing a wireless access point. How would you really want to do that? And I kind of went over this information about securing a wireless access point because a lot of us actually have those in our home and so forth, and want to make sure that we're as secure as reasonably possible in our neighborhoods. And then hackers' tools that can crack apart that security that we thought we implemented. Mostly these are still only effective against Leap for one of the tools, using NRAP, and also something like AirCrack or something like that for web security. Also, we took a look at authentication mechanisms, including 802.1x, which, by the way, I might point out is what Microsoft uses on their campus, to my knowledge, because I've been up there a few times and talked to them about their wireless networks. But anyway, they do use some implementation of 802.11x, and to my knowledge, unless they're just being coy about it, they've never been hacked using 802.11x. 802.1x, so pretty strong. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.